If you really want to understand the rise of Islam, you first have to understand the world it was born into. And let me tell you, it was a complex and, frankly, surprising place. So, in this explainer, we're going to dive into the historical sources to piece together the religious landscape of pre-Islamic Arabia and see exactly how it set the stage for one of the world's great religions.
So right off the bat, we're faced with this huge puzzle. The sources are pretty clear. The early Arabs, the descendants of Ishmael, they started out as monotheists. They worshipped one god. But fast forward a few centuries, and their most sacred spot, the Kaaba in Makkah, was literally packed with 360 different idols. So you have to ask, how on earth did that happen?
Well, according to the accounts, this whole massive shift can be traced back to just one guy, an influential chief from the Khazar tribe named Amr bin Luhai. And what's interesting is he was apparently a really well-respected figure, known for being pious and charitable. That actually made what he did next even more impactful.
Okay, so let's follow the breadcrumbs here. We begin with a society that, at its core, believed in one God. Sure, over the generations, some of the original teachings might have gotten a little fuzzy, but that fundamental idea, it was still there.
The real turning point, the sources say, was a single journey. Amr bin Luhai takes a trip to Syria. Now, at the time, Syria was seen as this land of prophets and holy books, a really righteous place. And while he was there, he saw people worshiping idols. Instead of being repulsed, he thought, wow, this must be a good thing. So he brings an idol named Hubal all the way back to Makkah, sets it up right inside the Kaaba, and boom, that one single act was the spark. A whole new way of worship started spreading out from Makkah.
But it didn't stop with just one idol. Oh no, Hubal was just the beginning. Bringing that first idol in wasn't just a one-off thing. It basically opened the floodgates. A whole pantheon of gods was about to take root.
Pretty soon, different tribes in different areas started having their own favorite idols. You had Manat down by the Red Sea, Al-Lat over in Taif, Al-Uzza in the valley of Nakhla. And get this, there's even this wild story in the sources where Amr bin Luhai is supposedly told by a jinn, a spirit, that these ancient idols from Noah's time were buried nearby. So what does he do? He digs them up and hands them out to the tribes. I mean, talk about embedding an idea deep into the culture.
And this whole practice just exploded. It grew to a scale that's kind of hard to imagine. By the time the Prophet Muhammad conquered Mecca, the Kaaba was just jam-packed with 360 different idols. It got to the point where pretty much every tribe, and often every single family, had their own personal idol.
Okay, so this is a really crucial point. We have to understand why they were doing this. In their minds, these idols weren't the ultimate creators of the universe, not at all. They saw them more like intercessors. They believed these idols could get them closer to the one supreme God, to Allah, and sort of, put in a good word for them. And this wasn't just about putting up a few statues. This new belief system brought with it a whole new way of life, a complex system of rituals, really specific rules, and superstitions that were woven into the fabric of their daily lives. So the worship itself was completely centered on these idols. I mean, some of the practices might sound familiar, like making a pilgrimage or offering a sacrifice, but the key difference is who they were for. They were now all directed at these new statues. People would travel for days to visit them, they'd make sacrifices on stone altars built for them, and they'd set aside parts of their food, their drink, their livestock, all as sacred offerings. And the rules could get super specific, especially when it came to animals. For example, you had the Bahira. So if a female camel gave birth to 10 baby girls in a row, she was suddenly sacred. They'd slit her ears to mark her, and then she was set free. No more work, no more milking, except maybe for special guests. She was basically retired in the name of the gods.
And there was something very similar called the Sayyiba, again, another female camel, set free to roam for the gods once she'd given birth to a certain number of female babies. It was this kind of living offering, taking a valuable animal completely out of practical use.
And it just kept going. There was the wasila, which was a sheep that had a really specific birth pattern, and the hami, a male camel that was put out to pasture and dedicated to the idols after he'd, done his duty a certain number of times. So you see, these weren't just simple little beliefs. This was a really intricate web of superstitions.
Okay, so with all these different gods to please and all this uncertainty in life, how did you actually make a big decision? What did you do?
Well, one really common way was to use these special featherless arrows called aslam. They'd have a bundle with 3 arrows. One meant yes, one meant no, and a third one was just blank. So if you had a big choice to make, like should I go on this trip, should I marry this person, or even to settle a dispute over who a child's father was, you draw an arrow. And whatever it said, that was considered the will of the gods. That's what you did.
But, none of this was happening in a vacuum. We have to remember the Arabian Peninsula was a major crossroads, full of different cultures and different faiths. So let's zoom out for a second and take a look at the bigger religious picture in the region.
So you had a really strong Jewish presence, especially in places like Yathrib and Yemen. Christianity was also very common, particularly in Najran and with the northern tribes up near the Roman Empire. Then you had Magianism, that's Zoroastrianism, over by Persia, and even some traces of an older faith, Sabianism. But here's the key thing. The source we're looking at is pretty critical of all of them. It describes Judaism at the time as being more about power than faith, and Christianity as having become this peculiar medley of man and God.
And yeah, these different religious groups were not always getting along. The source points to one really brutal incident involving a Judaic king in Yemen, Yusuf du Nawas. He allegedly massacred the entire Christian community of Najran in a pit of fire because they refused to convert. It's a shocking story, but it really shows you how deep the tensions could run back then.
So, when you put it all together, what's the big picture this historical account is painting? Well, it's a picture of a region where pretty much every faith, new or old, seemed to be drifting or even decaying.
And the source's final judgment is pretty harsh. It basically argues that even the big, established monotheistic religions had wandered really far from their original teachings. Judaism, it says, had turned into abominable hypocrisy, and Christianity had opened its doors wide to polytheism.
So, at the end of the day, the source concludes that the whole religious scene, whether you're talking about the idol worshippers, the Jews, or the Christians, had just become this big, confusing medley of practices. It was all a bunch of rituals and rules that didn't really connect with people's actual lives, spiritually or practically. It's like all of these religions had, in one way or another, lost their way. So what we're left with is this really incredible story. You've got a society that starts with one god, but because of one man's trip, ends up with 360 idols in its holiest place. And all this is happening while the other major religions around them are in their own state of turmoil. The world this account describes is one that's spiritually adrift, and it leaves us with a question that's just as relevant today as it was then. What happens when any tradition, any belief system starts to lose its original meaning?